Hey guys, welcome back to the build. We're going to jump right into the spray booth because now that we're done with the preliminary body work, we're ready to apply some primer to the car, and then we'll recheck it and see if there's anything else that needs to be done. The initial body work is never the complete end all and be all of the body work on a project, as once you apply the primer, it'll reveal any flaws that you may have missed while applying your putties or sanding or any other type of work that you've done to the body. In this case, I'm using Tamiya pink primer and gray primer, both the fine primers, as I find that those are the best primers for the money as far as I'm concerned. Now I'm going to switch to the good old Tamiya gray primer, as all of the other colors, such as the black for the undercarriage and gray for the interior, won't be hurt or changed by the Tamiya primer in gray. And then we're going to go back and give another coat of pink just to make sure we get good coverage, as the Tamiya spray is very fine and I like to layer it up slowly just to get a nice coating of primer on the car. Alright, now that we've got the body all primed up, and if you're asking why pink, it's because this pink primer really works fantastic to bring the red paint to life. So now we're going to wet sand the entire primer to get it as smooth as possible. We're going to check our repair work on the body, as I see that it's going to need a little bit more work on that rear section. But the rest of it's looking pretty good. So now we're going to go ahead and start wet sanding it. We're going to use our 3000 grit sanding sponges. I think this is the 3000. And we're just going to start doing a little wet sanding. Okay, we're going to start our wet sanding using our 3000 grit. Let's see if this one's good, if we're going to need a new piece. And the first thing rear here, since this is where we needed to do quite a bit of repair work, we're going to start cleaning this up first. And that way we'll see whether more work is needed. We're going to be okay. Now, I don't know if you guys can hear this over the fans I have going. Sorry about the excess noise in the back, as the AC system went down and we're waiting for a whole new system to be installed at the house. We are having to use the old-fashioned method of cooling ourselves off, which is using fans. So you can tell that your wet sanding is having a pretty good effect, as you'll hear it change from a very rough, coarse sanding. It'll get quieter and smoother. Now, I'm not too concerned with sanding through the primer right now, as my main goal is to smooth everything out and make sure we catch any high and low spots in the body, so that we'll have one even canvas to apply our paint. Primer, when you smooth it out properly, it'll look as if it's the color the plastic was molded in, as primer goes from flat to having a semi-gloss type of a shine to it. There we know that we've got the primer flattened and evened out really nicely. So now I'm going to go over each individual body panel until I get a similar result to this. And if the car looks good overall, I can see where I'm going to have to do a little bit more work to clean up a few things. And then once it passes the final inspection, it'll be ready for paint. Now I use the tissue paper to clean it off and buff it out, as the slightly abrasive nature of this paper helps to polish out the primer here, so I can see if there's anything else that's going to need attention. As you'll see when done, the body will have a complete, almost a semi-gloss pink paint job. And I'm happy with that there. The fender's looking good. Side of the bumper's looking good. Okay, let's continue on with the bumper and work our way around. This also gives us a chance to check on our mold line removal to make sure that we got everything off that we wanted to. Find it easier to work panel by panel so that way you make sure you don't miss anything. Just going small area by small area. As it's pretty easy to miss something when you're jumping around the body. After I do my first round of sanding, I go back and check each panel one at a time, just like I'm doing now, just to make sure that I got in and painted everything that I really was looking to paint. Or not paint, but sanded down everything that I was really looking to paint. Sand. Right, there we go. I did it again. Here you can see how the primer is starting to take a pretty nice shine. I've also found that if you want to make a nice matte finish model, this actually is a good way to get a really nice matte finish on your model. Now let's just take a look at the hood here. I see a couple of spots there that could use a little more smoothing out. As there will be things you'll see after you're sanding that you won't see beforehand. The primer really works well to reveal issues in the body that you may have missed at first. And every one of those issues will affect your paint job when you actually start laying the color. And so this is a tedious process. It's a bit monotonous, but it pays off in the end. When you go to lay your paint. As you will have removed anything that might have damaged your paint job. As you can see here, the more I buff it out, the glossier it gets. But that's not the point of what we're doing here. Working out pretty nice. There's a couple of little scratches that were in there, which I think will not affect the paint finish. They seem to have filled in pretty nicely. Okay, so we can let that go. And we'll come back and do a little more sanding there just to see if we can. Okay, we've sanded it down as much as we can. We've taken out everything that was pretty much wrong with it. Now we're going to have to give it another coat of primer. We'll see how that sets, and if that's good, then we'll be ready for color. We're moving along with the Pops Fiero build, and just wanted to give you a look at the engine and give you my thoughts on this little assembly here. It's just assembled from two halves and the two engine block and the heads, which is about 4 parts total. Now, one thing you're gonna have to look out for is when you assemble this engine, you're gonna have a pretty noticeable seam on the oil pan, so that's gonna require some smoothing out, and a little tricky on the upper part of the pan there. But that thing out is that's going to be readily visible under the car. The top of the engine, you're not going to see this once the intake's on it, but you smooth it out just to make sure the intake will sit straight. The front here, again, you have to smooth it out to make it an even resting platform for the engine belts. As you're going to notice when you put this together, the two halves don't exactly line up right. So it's going to require a little work to get everything to be even. That's going to be most apparent on the back of the engine block here, where you're going to notice that there's going to be one side that's just a little bit higher than the other, and that's not going to allow the transmission to sit flush with the engine block. So you're going to have to sand that down and even out both halves of the engine, like I've done here, and that'll allow your transmission to sit fully flush with the block. Now, speaking about the transmission, there was a little bit of flash on the edges. Still have to clean up a little bit more on the edges of the transmission housing. Nothing too bad. Now the transmission has three tabs so that you can align it within the engine. There you go. So you can align them to the engine. You can see here, it'll be the upper tab, this tab here, and then another one on the bottom here that allows you to align the transmission to the engine, which gives you a pretty good alignment of both parts. Now it's going to be a little bit of a fit when you're putting it together, but it gives you a pretty good solid mounting point, and you're going to have to give it a good squeeze to have it meet the block. As I was saying, there is a little, it's not perfectly straight. This kit is good, but it's not to me a good as far as fit and finish of the parts. So you're going to have to do a little bit of work there, and when you put it together, you'll find that it'll fit very well. Put a little glue on it, and you'll have a pretty nice assembly there. So I'm going to put it together so I can show you guys what it looks like. Okay, here we have, I haven't glued it together yet, as I've got a lot of painting to do in this, and a lot of detail work to do here. But here we have both the engine and the transmission mated together. And you can see now, since I shaved down the back of the engine block, the transmission fits almost totally flush with the engine block. So while this is a really nice mold and the details are really nice on it, you can see the oil filter, there's a starter, the forward engine mount, you can see the nice engraving in the block itself. Now while it is, and you can see the bolts for the oil pan, it is a very nice casting, and for the most part goes together very easily. It's still not quite at the level of say a Tamiya with the fit of the parts, so you are going to have to do a little bit of work to get the parts to sit the way you want them to. But that's just part of the fun of modeling. It just makes it a little more challenging. I know some people say that, well, they should fit right from the factory, from the beginning, but this is a kit from 1984, and precision was not as what it is today. So the way this goes together, it does fit very well, and I think it's Monogram should be commended for what a nice assembly this engine and transmission really are. Alright, we're going to keep going with this. I'm working on the belts. I saw someone posted once that the belts on these plastic kits look a little too thick, and I gotta agree with that. So what I'm doing is shaving them down a little bit to thin them out and give them a bit more of a scale appropriate look. You can see here that the belt, that the alternator, which is this one here, I've thinned out quite a bit compared to the belt on the AC compressor. And it does look better, thinner. It looks a little more scale appropriate. So the way I'm doing that is just taking my X-Acto knife and just slowly scraping down the plastic there until I get it to a sufficient thickness that I think looks scale appropriate.
But anyway,
so I am happy with the way that looks. So I'm going to continue to do this and doing a little seat work on the Fiero, and have to make a few corrections to the seat. As you can see here, we have a nice smooth rounded edge, which is what the seats were really like, and this is what we started with. You have some very heavy mold. Whoops. As I drop the seat, I got it back. You have some very heavy mold lines. Let's see if we can get you guys, get the camera to focus on this here. You see that? Very heavy mold lines on the sides of the seat. So they all have to be ground off. This doesn't look good at all. Whereas here, you can see with the seats ground off and everything rounded, that looks much better. This one's almost done. Gonna get to the next one, and we'll have a very nice looking set of seats. Okay, after, I'm gonna guess, more than an hour of work on the seats, you can see how this seat is the one that I did all of the repair work to, as far as removing the mold lines, making sure that the seat back and everything all match each other, sanding down all the seam lines so that when the primer is sprayed on it, it's going to appear to be one completely solid seat as opposed to several pieces. And with the mold lines, which were very prominent. Now here you see a seat which I haven't done anything to, and you can see the seam lines. I just attached the seat back to it, and you can see how different they are. With the mold lines and the seam lines, the way they just kind of stick out, you can see it here in the seat cushion very well. So is it a lot of work? Yes, it is. Is it worth it? 100%. As you can just see from looking at the seat here, it completely changes the profile of the seat and gives you a much more realistic appearance. And if you want to talk about the seat back cover, the way it joins the seat, let's see, you see this seam here is very prominent, and you would notice that right away the minute you looked into the model. Whereas this one here, you just see a hint of the seam, which is totally smoothed out. There is a little bit of discoloration due to the sanding, but other than that, the seam is almost invisible, and once it's in primer and paint, you'll never know it was there. So yes, it is a lot of work, takes a lot of time, but I think it's definitely worth it and gives you a much more realistic appearance. Now about to start on this one with grinding down all the seam lines and filling in the seat back and sealing everything up and getting rid of all of these imperfections. Okay, here we have the completed seats. As you can see now, there are no seam lines or any significant lines there, and once they are primed, they should look like one solid part. All the mold lines are gone, seam lines are gone, and they look much more realistic than they did just a little while ago. So I do recommend that you guys give this a shot. It gives you a much more realistic looking seat. And then after sanding, like the first thing I sanded with was my 15 to 1800, if you could see through that. And then I went over it with my 4 to 6000, and that polished the plastic out. And that cleaned it up just so that we could get just so that they would look like one solid part. Removed a lot of the residue and gave them a quick wash. And here we are with our finished seats. The front seats and the rear part of the seat are now evenly aligned. And matched perfectly to each other. Okay, that's it for the seats. We're going to keep going. Here we're starting with some Vallejo dark aluminum. It's a really great color sprayed over a gloss black base. Really gives a beautiful metallic sheen. Just a little bit darker than what aluminum would be, so that it gives it sort of that slightly burned, used look. Just something that you know that there's heat traveling through it, so it's darkened the metal a little bit. We're going to use the same color on the catalytic converter and on the exhaust manifolds. And here we can show you the difference in color between the dark aluminum and the aluminum that we used on the transmission casing. Here you can see the difference between the two shades of aluminum. The brighter silver color is on the transmission housing, and this darker, almost burned metal looking color is on the exhaust system. I think that differentiating between the two distinct metals makes for a much more visually interesting project, so that when you look underneath the car or you look in the engine compartment, you'll see different colors which represent the different metals of the aluminum casing, or maybe the steel or iron used in the exhaust. And I think that these two colors from Vallejo accomplish that beautifully. I recommend the Vallejo metal colors 100%. Pick them up and I love them. Now we're going to get to my favorite part of doing exhaust systems on these kits, which is aging and giving a used look to these components. It's one of my favorite parts of model building, and to me it just gets almost like it gets the part to tell a story. You can tell that this car has been driven, it's been enjoyed. The parts are not new, but they are still in excellent condition, and the guy's just been having a good time, which has heated the metal up a little bit and discolored it. And it's just a fun way to add a little life to a model. I do this by combining a few different colors. I used Alclad 2, I used the burnt iron and the pale burnt metal. And then I add a little bit of Tamiya clear blue just to give a tint of color to the metal. And that ages the metal, as well as showing the heat discoloration from use, which is what would happen on a real car. I think that it definitely adds to the story of the model and brings more life to it. So this is something that I really enjoy doing, and I've showcased it in a few of my other videos. And I really recommend anyone who hasn't tried it that you try it, because it's fun, and you can take it as far as you want. Now that I'm done with all of the major painting, now I'm going to add the transparent blue just to give the metal that blue tone it gets from when it gets heated really hot, and that'll really just finish off the exhaust. It's going to look great. At least I think so. Okay, now we're getting down to the nitty gritty. We've got the parts that we've been working on all done, so we're going to take a quick look at them and see exactly how well we did. All right, let's do this. All right, let's take a quick look at everything we've done. Here are the seats with no mold departing lines. They look really good, solid, all one piece now. This has really turned out much better than even I thought it would. I'm very happy with that. Now we have the exhaust with all our heat discoloration. You can see that the paint treatment here just really, the exhaust just tells a story now. It's not just a silver painted exhaust. It looks great. And now we have the engine and the transmission. Still need a little detailing, but looking good so far. Now we have the catalytic converter, and like the exhaust, just tells a story of a car that's been enjoyed. This is exactly why I do this, because every time you look at a car, each individual part has something to say. And here we have the final part of our story for this video. The body is done. It's completely finished. All the repair works on it have been completed. Everything's been filled. All the modifications have been done. The only thing needed now are the two lower quarter panels, one of which is still in for work and the other one is done. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more.